Okay, so it's time for a film review, and the film I'll be reviewing in this video is A Royal Night Out. Now, as I say with all these videos, just a quick disclaimer, there will be spoilers in this, naturally, because I'm going to be talking about the film. So if you haven't seen this and you don't want any spoilers, don't watch. Although the storyline is not particularly complex with this one. So I actually saw this film on DVD. This is the cover, very lavish cover, perhaps in keeping with the royal theme. Um, and I admit, when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, this is another royal film, because there has been quite a few in recent years. There's been the Queen, the young Victoria, the King's Speech, the Duchess, um, and I am sort of the view that there's sort of an excess number of royal films, and there's another out at the moment, in fact, on Netflix about the ascension of Queen Elizabeth II. I do think there's other aspects of British history that can be more covered. For example, some of our great prime ministers. But, um, for instance, Lord Grey, Gladstone, Lloyd George, and other situations like the Chartist movement and other aspects of social history. So at first, that was my reaction on another royal film. On the other hand, this is original. It's definitely a concept that hasn't been done before. So basically, the film's directed by Julian Gerald. It was released in 2015. I didn't actually see this in the cinema. I first saw it on DVD. And it stars Sarah Gadon as the young Princess Elizabeth, as she then was, Belle Powley as her younger sister, Princess Margaret, who was seen as a little bit more wild of the two, Jack Renner, I'm not sure how his name is pronounced, um, stars a young airman, Rupert Everett as His Majesty King George VI, and Emily Watson as Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So basically, the backdrop to this is that it's VE Day, or VE Night to be more precise, and the whole population celebrating the end of World War II, or at least the end of the European theatre of World War II. The war hadn't quite finished at that point, which is something that people sometimes forget. Nevertheless, there were really, really jubilant celebrations, and the film really shows that, and that's not exaggerated. They were some of the biggest parties London ever saw, indeed the nation ever saw. So basically, the two young princesses, so young women, at this point, they want to enjoy it like everyone else. Initially, their parents, especially Queen Mother, are reluctant to do this, but they eventually, the father is a softer touch. She eventually gives in and lets them go out on the grounds that they have chaperones. Now, there is one thing that's important to note about this film. It's not meant to be an exact account of that night. But one thing that is interesting is apparently this really did happen. Um, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret were allowed out for a time with chaperones. It's unlikely that it was quite as adventurous as the film implies. But that's the great thing about these sort of hidden episodes of history where we really don't know what happened. Certainly, it's something the Queen would never reveal. The Queen is quite discreet about her private life. She never does interviews. Um, so perhaps there is a lot of artistic license, but who knows? Who knows? Certainly, it's fair to say the Queen and her sister probably never experienced anything like it before or since. Indeed, no one did. But especially given that they were basically undercover. So, in the film, the two princesses get kind of get detached from the chaperones who are distracted. Initially, they're brought to a very boring sort of ball with a lot of old lords and ladies, and of course, these are young women. They just want to have a good time, so they kind of rebelliously break away, especially Princess Margaret. But in the course of breaking away, they themselves get split up, and basically, what happens his Princess Elizabeth ends up with an airman who's gone AWOL. And unlike the rest of London, he isn't having a particularly good time. He's a bit distracted and kind of, I suppose you could say, a party pooper in the sense that he isn't really interested in the celebrations. He just wants to sleep. He wants to get to his mother. But later on in the film, you realize the reason why. And initially, they meet because he pays her bus fare. And the sort of old matronly type bus conductor who doesn't want to, discarding VE Day and still making people pay the fare. Anyway, that's how they meet. And the next scene, quite a tense scene actually. And to be honest, it's a scene that made me slightly uncomfortable, although it's a clever scene. Basically, what King George VI had asked his daughters to do was gauge the public mood whilst he was making his speech at midnight. So they put on his speech on the radio in the pub, and everyone in the pub is kind of listening and being very patriotic and royalist. And he kind of mutters like under his breath, "Who cares?" or "Posh so and so." And there's a sergeant who takes exception with this and says, "How dare you, you disrespectful little so and so." And of course, she takes exception to it because it's her father, but she can't give the game away. So, despite the fact that she and the rest of the pub kind of treat him like a traitor and he gets thrown out, she still kind of tags along with him because she wants him as a guide. So, basically, the funny thing is she has the princess syndrome, but she really is a princess, which he doesn't know. He just thinks she's a spoilt brat. Um, but basically, both sisters end up with all sorts of adventures. Princess Margaret ends up in a brothel. Um, And the two chaperones realize they're in deep shit basically when they've lost the princesses. But to cut a long story short, it ends up they all once again end up in the same place with the chaperones. And once again, the airman finds himself in trouble and at the receiving end of being roughed up by security, for want of a better term. But basically, she demands that they leave him, not security, it's like officers. So it's presumably a gentleman's club or something like that. She demands they leave him alone. And they say, "Who are you?" "Princess Elizabeth." So at that point, everyone's shocked, including him. And initially, his reaction isn't so much shock, but frustration, because he's been lied to all night. And he's resentful of this. And you really get the impression this young man is no fan of the royal family. And partly it comes from resentment about the way he was treated in the service. That is to say, that after seeing his friend killed, he asked for some time off, and the Air Force wouldn't give that to him. Instead, they sent him to Japan, or at least to fight the Japanese. So he's quite bitter. But basically, they kind of patch up. They go to meet his mother, and then he ends up in Buckingham Palace. And even there, he's still kind of not impressed. But the funny thing is, Princess Elizabeth says, "Oh, I owe you some money." And he says directly to the king, "That will be £7 and sixpence, please." And this is very amusing. That's what I love about the British situation, that a film like this can be made basically where a common soldier, a common airman, asks the King Emperor of the United Kingdom and British Empire for money, and it's something that would be inconceivable in an absolute monarchy like Thailand, for instance. So it's a pretty entertaining film. It's a good cast, and I have to say it's a sort of film you need to see several times. At first, I didn't quite know what to make of it, but this is the second time I've watched it, and it is an entertaining film. It's an amusing film. The pub scene made me slightly uncomfortable because it kind of, to me, it reminded me how patriotism can be, and neo-royalism can kind of go too far, although of course it's fictional. But It's an uncomfortable scene because you think, well, this young guy's served his country and he's been thrown out on VE Day. It's a bit, but of course, it's an artistic interpretation of events. But it is an entertaining film. It's a good cast. Um, Sarah Gadon is very good as Princess Elizabeth. Um, and it's not bad casting, you know, she's an attractive lady, and actually the young Princess Elizabeth was an attractive young woman. Just go and show you a picture. This is a book I got last year. See if I can find a picture of Princess Elizabeth at that time. Obviously now we see her as the old queen, but she was a young woman who liked to party, and this is Princess Elizabeth on her wedding day in the late 40s. So if you look at that and you look at Sarah Gadon, I think the casting is good. Robert Everett's pretty good as the king, and yeah, I think it's good cast all round. Um, what else can I say? So yeah, in the end of the film, he's absent without leave. Of course, he thinks he's going to be court-martialed, but Princess Elizabeth drives him to his barracks. She, of course, worked in the auxiliary corps during the war, and she's um, one interesting side info about the Queen that maybe my foreign viewers may not realize is she was licensed to drive an army truck during the war. She served in the auxiliary corps. So anyway, this is an entertaining film. It's an original film. If you're thinking, oh, yet another royal film, I would say that's what I thought at first as well. But it is an entertaining film. It's an original film, and I recommend it. I'd give it about 8 out of 10. Um, yeah, it's good at what it does. And it's all set in one night, which is interesting. So that's it. A royal night out, based on the imagining of what happened when Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret were let out during VE Day. Why do I not give it 10 out of 10? Maybe because I think the artistic license is a bit artistic at points. I mean, for example, when the airman is in Buckingham Palace, and he's a little bit curt, almost rude to the king, I think that's a little far fetched, even for someone who has resentment to the monarchy. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know if that would be the case. And certainly they do take the imagining quite far in certain scenes. Nevertheless, I mean, for example, there's scenes where the airman has a fist fight in front of Princess Elizabeth, and yeah, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's creative, probably far fetched, but it's good at what it does. And to be fair, the film doesn't say this is true events; it says inspired by true events. That's an important point to realize. So check it out. A Royal Night Out. I'm surprised it didn't get more attention actually, because usually royal films do. It didn't get as much attention as The King's Speech or The Queen, but I would say it's up there with them. It's an entertaining film. Okay, thanks for watching.